they're paying taxes, but they're not getting the Social Security benefits, and so they're being
That
pushed.
sounds like things they should get.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
If they were
So-
documented.
I know how to define a human right.
Human rights, as defined in the Universal, or in the Declaration of Universal
Yeah.
Human Rights, are indivisible and interconnected, meaning that you need all of them in order for them to be in full force. And they're given to, or they should be given to all humans simply for the sake of them being human.
To me, I guess just some of the basic ones that I can think of, just, deriving from like Locke and Hobbes, the right to be able to speak freely, the right to life, things like that. So that's what I was thinking, but now that you brought that up, I agree, and I agree that they're all connected. You can't have one without having the other. And
I would basically say that I know what human rights are, like, to me, but I wouldn't say that I would know the universal definition, kind of like that you guys talked about.
Everybody could have a different definition. Like, if it's just the human right to, like, water and actually just the rights to have access to things that make you live, then that's a significantly different aspect than a culture in an economy. So as the world develops, like, the human rights definition also needs to.
Human rights are universal.
That's kind of the point, right?
yeah, I mean, I think I'm glad that we were all able to come up. I think that we can all agree. Well, obviously, we all agree that every individual has the right to these human rights. I mean, I guess it, really does depend on what list we're going off of what these human rights are. But if we're going off that universal index of human rights, we're all human here, so we should all have those rights too that we're delegated.
Sure. I think one challenge that is presented by this is just geographically, politically, people in different parts of the world at different, and of course throughout different times in history, human rights have looked different. I would like them to be universal, but unfortunately that's kind of a fairy tale land, right? It doesn't always work out that way, unfortunately.
For human rights, they need to be universal, as it says it's human rights, and you got to think about everybody is a human and everybody deserves the rights that come along with that.
The right to an abortion is a human right.
The right to be able to choose what is specifically correct for the woman in the situation.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. That's the only reason why I didn't walk up, is because I don't know if abortion specifically is a right, but I think right to autonomy is a human right.
I don't think that there's a right to bodily autonomy when you're talking about another body, and that just comes from the scientific fact and I guess the belief too that the fetus that is growing inside you, it has its unique genetic code and DNA once the sperm and the egg come together, and so that is what I define a life, and that's what biology textbooks, for as long as we can remember, have defined as a life.
I believe that there is no right to an abortion, and instead I would advocate for a right to life. That being said, that doesn't mean that we cannot stand by mothers who are experiencing an unplanned pregnancy. I believe that some of the best work that's being done in this country is by the pro-life community, by individuals who have set up entities to care for mothers in difficult situations.
For myself, have been to a lot of pro-life rallies and stuff like that where they donate formula and diapers and things like that, and so I think we also need to do a better job of not just caring about the child when they're born, but standing by those mothers and those individual women who are in that situation.
The mass detention of undocumented immigrants at the U.S.-Mexico border is a humanitarian crisis.
In the fiscal year 2022, I was looking up the statistics before we came down. 853 bodies of children were found at or around the border by Border Patrol. This is a bad issue. The problem is number one, we have an open border with no restrictions whatsoever. We have a humanitarian crisis where individuals, kids under the age of 18, are sent without supervision up through the border. We have drug cartels who are running the areas on the Mexican side of the border. We also have an immigration system that is incredibly backed up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a product of immigration. I'm sure probably somewhere down lineage we all are. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, I'm glad we can all agree that it is a humanitarian crisis. Our immigration system is flawed, and so it's backed up, and so it takes 20 years to get a green card or citizenship, and that's not fair. And that's, everyone should have the right to have access to the things that we have here in America, to education, to water, to things like that. And so that in and of itself is a humanitarian crisis.
Absolutely. Especially when we think about, nobody wants this issue that we have, like, of people dying. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants people to die ever. I know that's a pretty general statement, but the way that they are dying,
Very polarized.
yeah, so the way that they are dying, yes, it's terrifying to think about, like drugs and drug cartels. But drugs are gonna be in the United States no matter what. With the way that we use border security is ineffective. The way that we use TSA, it's ineffective for drug control and drug trafficking. We saw Xi Jinping and Joe Biden speak recently about agreeing that the fentanyl export from China needs to slow. Like, it's not just coming from Latin America, so it needs to be thought of. We can't just think of these people as everybody's a cartel member.
Yeah,
no, we can't.
It's definitely a humanitarian crisis, whether who you blame for it. I like that idea that even though one group may blame a certain person, another group may blame a certain person, it's still a problem that we need to solve. I really like that idea.
Well, to assign some blame, I think that the United States does have some responsibility for this humanitarian crisis because the United States was involved in destabilizing a lot of Latin American countries, and I don't think that we can just go around the world and do our little American experiment thing on whenever we want and then be like, oh, well, now they want to escape, now they're willing to put their lives at risk to enter here. Why would they do that, right? In the Constitution, there's like one line on immigration, which is that Congress has the right to decide it. So we didn't have a very expansive immigration process in the first place. It wasn't until the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1800s, a lot of Chinese migrants came and people were really racist and they didn't like the jobs and they were like, they're going to culturally degrade our white culture, and that's what caused the Chinese Exclusion Act. So immigration law has always been based in xenophobia. It's always been based in racism. It's always been based in prejudice. And I think until we dismantle that, we can't really solve the humanitarian crisis.
The U.S. government must protect the rights of undocumented immigrants.
Well, okay, you said human rights. They're not unhuman because they want to escape a situation that isn't favorable. So absolutely, but it does put a challenge financially on a nation. Is it one that is a burden? I don't think so. I think that the undocumented immigrants could very much help the United States
As a country that people are coming to get away from, like you brought up, a lot of people coming from Latin America, we are the ones who destabilized their governments and made those countries to where they want to leave. We have to make that system of becoming a citizen a lot less cluttered and a lot less red tape, and I feel like that's a responsibility of our government.
So I don't think that it is the U.S.'s job to protect the rights of undocumented immigrants. I think that, one, why do we have an obligation to do that? And I think that your point was, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's because it's a human rights violation, right? Like, it's the U.S. has an obligation to do that because it's a human rights issue. Am I correct in that?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I don't think I don't think that just because you're undocumented, that means you no longer deserve rights. I
Yeah,
don't think-
absolutely. I mean, you're still a human, right? And
Yeah.
you still should have access to those things. But with that being said, I think the illegal immigration problem and having undocumented citizens in the U.S. actually does a lot of harm to economically, because these people aren't getting paid fairly. They're paying taxes, but they're not getting the Social Security benefits, and so they're being
That
pushed.
sounds like things they should get.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
If they were
So-
documented, if it
was easy for them to get documented.
yeah, and that's a whole other issue of the immigration process, right? But the U.S. should have no obligation to provide human rights to them because they are not U.S. citizens. It should be the job of Latin American countries to figure their stuff out.
What if we were part of the problem, though? Like, what if we're
What is
part-
that claim coming from, though?
It's coming from, I think it was, and I learned this in class, so I don't know all the specifics, but it was the Reagan administration which was sponsoring terrorist organizations in Latin America. I think one of them was Nicaragua, that they wanted to see rise in power in the government, and that's where a lot of it, they were providing them arms, they were providing them with like intel so that they could basically do a coup.
To simply put it, I don't think that the U.S. should have an obligation to provide undocumented immigrants any benefits that American citizens get.
So I just have a quick question then. So do you think then that we should streamline and make the pathway to be getting American citizenship easier for immigrants?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you.
I would agree with both of the things you guys said. Kind of just to touch on that, I would say that throughout society, I feel like we've progressed in so many areas, but that's just an area that we haven't really progressed in. Like,
Well, in a sense, you're saying that we're obligated to protect them by making it easier for them to receive citizenship and thus gain protection.
yeah, I would
Okay.
say that we're obligated to help them out, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
Okay.
Police play a vital role in protecting human rights.
This is not really a question. Like, the whole idea of policing is to enforce laws, and those laws are supposed to enforce your human rights. I think that the overall police do the job in which is put out for them. There are just improvements that we can make so that they can do a better job, right? Like body cams, I think that should be universal regardless of where you're at. It not only protects the person in the situation interacting with the cop, but it protects the cop themselves.
In specifically Seattle, defunding the police is, in my opinion, the wrong way to go. Funding them and expanding them to include some of the social work aspects that we see people want to have in policing, is that important? Absolutely. Because although a social worker or a mental health professional may know what somebody is going through, will they be well equipped in a situation where they might be violently or threatened violently or harassed potentially?
There is an alarming practice of police brutality against people of color that violates their right to safety and security.
I mean, yeah, duh. I think that statistics show that a disproportionate amount of people of color face human rights violations from police when compared to their white counterparts. Historically, there's been significant violence from the police against people of color, and that doesn't go away by just putting in the Constitution. Okay, everybody's equal. Yeah, that's not how reality works. You have to make more active steps in order to make true change. And I don't know. This one feels very, very on the chin, very clear. Yeah.
I did like what you had to say, how writing something does not really change the ideologies of certain people and racist ideologies in our country. You can't just say, all men are created to be equal. That doesn't change people's mindsets.
Liberal here, so a little bit of a big government person, but I think genuinely just having some relatively uniform, I mean, of course, depending on where you're at, like a bigger city versus a small city will deal with their policing differently, but just having some things like DEI training so that people are more informed of their communities, probably having some quotas so that police reflect their communities.
Regardless of where you'd like to see it in the future, you'd like to see some change in this area, right? I think this is something that starts in our neighborhoods and expands out and doesn't start from Washington, D.C. and then come this way.
I would say, to your point about bottom up, why hasn't that happened already?
A lot of times they get so sucked up into the narrative of administrative work and like looking at their own department when really I think if I were to give advice to an individual who is becoming police chief in their local community, I would tell them to get involved in that neighborhood, show up at community events, be in that parade and show face. I think that's what's really important. And I think you're right. I think that's why a lot of times we're failing, because we're not actually getting involved in those communities.
And I agree that we should increase community building. I think that people should be able to trust their police, and we should probably do things
Right.
to intentionally do that. But I think it's less about the narratives being pushed by the left or the right, but that local governments just don't usually work in that collective way in which they build up themselves and then have these what ends up being like a uniform process overall. And so I think that it would be nice, it would be 100% nice if the federal government didn't have to do this, but I think that I think just how much time it's taken, I think at this point, I don't want to have to wait. I don't want to have to worry driving down the street whether or not my city hall thinks that my life is worth enough to put it on the books to improve their standards.
I feel that my right to political expression as a conservative or Democrat is protected on Drake's campus.
I'll just make this brief, but I am a conservative here on Drake's campus, and I think the thing that made it really clear to me was when those Trump supporters were on campus. I know they weren't allowed to be on campus, but a lot of the comments on Yik Yak were disgusting, telling, go spit on the MAGA supporters, go bully them, go harass them. That is disgusting. And another thing is, why is my teacher telling me, I'm not going to name the teacher, but why is she telling me that she's the Democratic minority leader in the Senate? That should not be something that the first thing you say on the first day. It is intimidating to me as a conservative, where I already know I'm a minority on campus.
I'm just going to be blatantly honest. I haven't actually been able to engage in a conversation like this on campus. So I think, like, I would say, like, I am left-leaning, and I would say that it's not that I'm actively searching for these conversations, but I just feel like it doesn't happen maybe as frequently as it would otherwise. I mean, maybe that's the school that I'm in, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same way. I'm a bit left-leaning, and I don't search out these to have conversations like this and express my opinions. But it's something I feel like is also part of a societal problem, is sharing political beliefs. They become so embedded into people's identities that it's hard to, separate somebody who might disagree with you. For some people, some people can't separate somebody disagreeing with them politically from them still being able to be a good person. And I feel like that's something that's really societal, and kind of you just see that in every place. So I feel like that's another big issue that comes out and really affects everything else.
Yeah, in advocacy, I know this is wild, liberal advocating for conservatives, but I think genuinely, no, like, to go past like stereotypes 100%, I think that Drake does not do a good job in allowing students to explore different political ideologies. I think it's such an important thing for students to be able to do, is to have conversations like these on both sides. And I don't think that, especially, there's a lot of bias against conservatives, and I think some of it is a little bit warranted, but like
Mhm, I
saying
get
that you're
that.
gonna spit
Yeah.
on somebody is it's not conducive to making a better country. It's not conducive to fulfilling human rights.
I'm a right-leaning student on campus, and it's been hard to engage in these sort of conversations. But I do want to say that it's been refreshing to have this conversation with you guys.
I think about Drake's motto, Veritas, truth. And if we're not allowing people to try to find the truth, to talk about the truth, talk about what is really true, and we're just focused on trying to appease people or please a particular group, that's not what it's about. So we should be pursuing truth. And I think that's exactly what this was here today, this sort of conversation that we had. We talked about the way that we saw things. We talked about the facts. We talked about how we saw those facts. That's what we should be doing. And so ultimately, I think that's the direction Drake should try to head in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, for today.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you guys.